Hello, and welcome to the second edition of the Business Standard. My name is Shaun Polczer, and we're here to take a look at some of the big breaking news stories in the business world and how they affect us here in the business capital of Western Canada, Calgary, Alberta. First out of the gate, we've got a lot to talk about in terms of market volatility. There's an old saying in the stock markets that volatility is your friend. And the carrot top in the White House, there is nobody more volatile. You'd think that Mr. Trump would be welcomed by the markets, but as we've seen, that's not entirely the case, with the main indexes firmly in the bear market territory, going back to where they were before even Biden was president, or even the pandemic, coincidentally when Mr. Trump was in power. Now today they're up a little bit, but the downward trend is down as far as it goes, with tariffs and trade wars and trying to take over Canada as the 51st state. And Greenland is, I don't know what we're going to call Greenland. But it's ironic that Trump used the stock markets as a proxy for his success or failures of his economic policies in the first administration, which he has seemingly totally avowed in the midst of the latest market gyrations, as the markets have swung back and forth from red to black territory, especially as it happened last week. He's got very good reason to be doing what he's doing, given that every time he changes his mind, the issue of tariffs, the market goes either way, up or down. So just doing a little bit of thing, because we're going to talk a little bit about markets on this show, and I have had a look at them. I tend to agree with people that the markets aren't the be all to end all. It's not proxy for the economy as much as anybody would like to think it is, or however, or a comment on Trump's economic policies in general, or even for that matter, the policies of the Liberal government in Ottawa as we go through this federal election campaign. But, the almost daily fluctuations in the market, even though they might not be good for your retirement portfolio or maybe the long-term health of the country, they're awesome for speculators, because it's long-term investors know that it's almost impossible to pick the tops and the bottoms of the market, but speculators know that it's always about the roller coaster ride, shorting it and going long back in when it seems to suit you, as it did last week. And it helps when the insider trader in chief tweets out his own personal stock ticker, GJT, and urges people to buy out on Twitter, which is coincidentally owned by his good buddy, the Doge hunter, Elon Musk. And 2 hours later, he's announcing a pause on tariffs after, this very elaborate ceremony on the White House lawn, barely a week ago, proclaiming them on all over the world, and, including the penguins in Antarctica, right? And, it helps that his own personal company has about $450 million in market cap, after losing $400 million last year. And people buying into his big token and everything, which is all to say Trump didn't become a millionaire for nothing. And so, it's a stretch to think that he's capable of single-handedly fixing the market. That would be like fixing the New York State lottery or the 649, which we all know is pretty much impossible to do. It's certainly possible that some of his friends and associates, the Donald, as he likes to refer to himself, and the third person included, could have made out with some really well-timed stock tips. Martha Stewart went to jail for less, just keep that in mind. And all of us here in the Western Standard are big Martha Stewart fans. We follow her gardening tips and everything religiously. So Martha went to jail. Remember. Anyway, so that said, we're going to talk a lot on the show today about not just tariffs, but we've got Jeff Callaway from ENRL, Energize Natural Resources, who's going to come in, and we're going to talk about some utility corridors through the Hudson Bay, in addition to maybe a little bit about orphan wells. Jeff's company operates some, well, obviously they're not orphan wells, but they're marginal wells of the kind that the Alberta government wants to keep going into the end of their useful economic life. And we're also going to talk with Russell Barnett of the Rural Alberta Concerned Citizens Group, who are opposed to solar farms out in Caroline. And since it's come to light, it turns out that there are literally dozens of communities all across Alberta that are fighting with similar issues with the Alberta Utilities Commission and some of the regulators on how to stop these things. But in the meantime, we're going to take a look at some of our stocks here that we follow at the Western Standard. I've got a little bit of an index going here. So in addition to the usual oil companies, I wanted to put WestJet on it, but WestJet apparently is privately owned these days. So I had to put in Air Canada so that we could top it off with our vacation index, which is a look at some of the currencies and how the Canadian dollar is performing against our popular destinations like the American dollar and the peso. We're also going to take a look at some of the big broader markets, which, like I said, are up today. But I've got this nice little article here from themarxist.com. So just in case you didn't think that communists were business people, it turns out they are. And we've got a defense of Trump's trade policies here from themarxist.com from a fellow named Nikolai Abelin Savinson. And in it, he says, quote, "The fact that the nation state puts a limit on the development of the productive forces has been explained time and time again by Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky." So there you go. If that's not an endorsement of Trump's economic policies, I don't know what is. So, and I'd just like to note, I know that a lot of Western Standard readers are Trump fans, but he's not my president. I didn't vote for him. It's not my problem insofar as it affects the price of oil. And in that regard, the price of oil is going down, which is bad for our government here in Alberta, because I know, talking to Premier Smith and some of our finance ministers, that every dollar up or down in the price of oil is worth about, it's a ridiculous number. It's about $750 million to the provincial treasury. And it's only become steeper in the last few years as more and more of these oil sands projects pay out and start paying royalties back to the government. So take it with a grain of salt. I filled up my huge beast. It's got a 100-liter tank. The carbon tax came off, and I was able to fill it up for, I think it was $1.47, whereas about 2 weeks ago it was over $1.80. So I'm saving $30-40 on a tank of gas, which is to say that, you know, Marx and Lenin would be proud of some of the things that Trump is doing and fighting against, you know, like currency manipulation, intellectual property theft, and non-trading practices. Down with the bourgeois. You know, Trump is merely fighting fire with fire, and we'll have to see how it all plays out. But if you're the Canadian government, well, you're just going to have to grin and bear it, because nobody really knows what's going to happen next, which is by design, and we're going to have to take it one day at a time. The one thing that we can say is that we are going to be able to keep our nation, for better or for worse, and for richer or poorer, because Donald Trump has done us all a favor when it comes to national unity. He has done the one thing that governments for 100 years in this country have not been able to do. And so this notion of removing interprovincial trade barriers and becoming self-sufficient in things like energy, we shall see. And in that vein, not only are we going to look at some of our favorite stocks, like I said, they're up today, but the energy complex, which we're all concerned with here in Calgary, will seem to hold up better than most because of the old TNT investment philosophy. When recessions take hold, TNT stands for toilet paper and toothpaste, which are things that people are still going to need no matter if the economics are up and down. And energy and gasoline is certainly one of those things. So, and it also helps that the carbon tax has been repealed. So it's a double-edged sword, and we're going to have to take whatever we can get. I've got a report here from Semaphore. These are well, they're net zero investment gurus, and they're talking about the global fundamentals for things like crude oil and EV batteries, which are particularly subject to tariffs. And as we all know, subsidies here in this country. which they predict will spark a trade war outside of the U.S., particularly places like Canada and Europe, where the governments are fighting to keep the value of these subsidies. The good news is that there's LNG competition in Europe. Remember, there's no business case. Our illustrious leader, dear Chairman Justin, said that there was no business case to shipping LNG to Europe or Germany. But when I was in Houston at the Sierra Week Energy Talk conference, I was able to talk to some gas company executives in Houston, and they insisted that it's not too late for Canada to still get into the LNG game. The massive LNG Canada facility is taking on gas as we speak, starting in the first week of April, and is on track to start exporting to Asia sometime this year. So, assuming that we get at least one or two more of these export terminals up and running on the coast, there's a good chance that Canada could still be the third or fourth largest exporter in a market that's expected to double within 10 years. Like they always say in investing school and rehab, it's never too late. You just have to get started. So with that, we're going to dive into our show and talk to some of our guests and hopefully turn this into a regular thing. So here we go. Take it away, John. I'm here with Jeff Callaway from Energize Natural Resources. For those who don't know, Jeff is also the chairman of the Western Standard Board of Directors, and he's got his offices here just down the hall in the Elvedin Center in Western Standard World Headquarters. He's always been a valuable resource. I can just walk down the hall and pick his brains on some of these issues that are affecting the oil patch in the bay. The government's mature well strategy was one of them. Jeff's company specializes in some of these older, lower productivity wells in the rural areas, which at the end of the day is good for both the Alberta government and the rural communities where the activities take place to keep them going longer for their maximum lives. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're going to talk about corridors and utility corridors, and specifically to the Hudson Bay, where Jeff was a little bit of a mover and shaker in some of this activity that's going on in Churchill and the railway to revitalize it, to get not just energy commodities like oil and gas and pipelines, but also power, electricity, and commodities, maybe such as uranium in Saskatchewan, to either one of these ports, either Churchill or I think it's
Port Nelson.
Port Nelson. I'm being informed here. Port Nelson, that they're talking about redeveloping and using the Hudson Bay as a deep water port to get to some of these overseas markets in Europe. So just like to welcome Jeff to the show and say, hey, how's it going? This is our second edition.
Oh, yeah.
We are, yeah.
Too bad I didn't make the first.
I'm not sure how that happened. It was kind of a work in progress. It just kind of happened. It was quite spontaneous.
Guinea pig for someone else. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, thanks for coming on today and taking a few minutes. So what can we say about energy corridors? Mark Carney was in town here the other day, and he was pitching. Sounded kind of like a pipe dream. He was talking about energy corridors going east, west, north, south. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your involvement in Hudson Bay and maybe what you thought of what Mr. Carney had to say.
Well, I mean, it's a nice change in tone, at least in some of the language, but it's kind of like Prime Minister Trudeau's comments about the budget will balance itself. Right. It just doesn't work that way. So they're still holding on to, Bill C-69, the tanker ban, C-48. We've seen so many projects just get stymied and just can't get approved and move forward under these bills. And yet they seem steadfast in wanting to keep those. So you can say you want to do utility corridors and, unleash the energy independence, so to speak, of Canadian resources and get resources to global markets. But you actually have to do the actual real work to make it happen. And they say they're not going to do that. And Carney has said that, he wants to give, basically veto rights to various provinces.
Sure.
And, in consultations with Indigenous communities. So if you're starting out giving effectively vetoes to various provinces or interest groups, whoever they may be, it's just not going to end up happening, because each of them are going to want to extract the maximum pound of flesh, and then you just don't see any projects going forward. We saw that actually there was a multitude of LNG projects, proposed out on the West Coast, and ultimately under, Christy Clark's government out there, she was holding so many of them to such high standards that they all ended up collapsing.
Well,
we finally had one now, which is fantastic. And likely we'll see FID, come on phase 2 there, which would be fantastic for the natural gas markets. But we should have had more by now.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, I've got this thing from Singapore. These are net zero people, and they were talking about reviving some of the LNG talks, and not specifically about Canada per se, but generally, with the global LNG market expected to double within the next 10 years or so, which is something that we're going to be talking about a little bit later.
Well, and we've seen China now, they're stopping any imports of US LNG.
Right.
Hey, would be great if we had our LNG plants operating now.
That been timely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can't just turn these things on overnight. Like Trump seems to think you can move a manufacturing plant and get it operational in a month or two.
Right.
But it doesn't happen. It takes years.
Well, you got to admit, like when I started covering this in the US, they didn't have anything. There was an export ban on natural gas, and now they've got a dozen of these things going along say the Gulf Coast. And they really are movers and shakers in the game. So when we're talking about Hudson Bay, this isn't really a new thing, is it?
No, well, really, it's far from a new thing. It's like, call it late 1800s is conceptually when it started. And it actually originally started with a port development at Port Nelson, which is just south of Churchill on the Hudson Bay. And the Canadian government really got behind it at the time. And they actually built, there's a rail bed that goes right out to Port Nelson. Port Nelson, there's nothing there now. But the rail bed is out there. They had built a 17-span train bridge out to an artificial island.
Wow.
But this is like 1910. So with those winds coming across the Hudson Bay into that kind of shallow delta on the Nelson River, they just couldn't, they didn't have the technology and equipment to really handle that at the time.
Okay.
So that was just before World War One. World War One happens, kind of puts a pause on everything as the country's resources get focused on World War One. And, then the thought is, okay, well, let's go up to Churchill, where you've got, the Churchill River. It's a little better port. And at that time, it was a little bit colder. The trains were smaller. They built that. This is about 300 kilometers of rail line from Gillam up to Churchill.
Okay.
The problem with that land is it's very muskeggy, very soft.
Right.
So the trains that you can run there can only go about 10 to 15 kilometers an hour. There's hardly any sidings. So that means if you have one train going this way, you need a siding so that it can pass and the other one can come by. So more sidings need to go in. And again, if you're only moving 10 to 15 kilometers an hour, like it's something like it takes 30 hours to get from the Paw, which is kind of the west side of Manitoba, past Thompson, and then up to Churchill. So that impacts the amount of products you can put on that rail line. And really the solution is to go to Port Nelson as part of a larger utility corridor type of concept for at least a rail line. It's only about a little over 100 kilometers from Gillam out to Port Nelson. You don't have to spend the gargantuan amounts of money on that last 300 kilometers going over Muskeg. And actually, like I was actually part of a group going when Omnitrax held the rights to that. They kind of put it up for sale because it had flooded again and the railway was operational.
So Omnitrax was that the American company?
That was the American rail
that
company.
were running it.
Yeah.
And they were basically abandoning it.
Yeah. So we actually had a deal to buy the railway, the port authority, the tank farm that was there, and Churchill had been used to import as well as transfer like different fuels from that port up to other communities around the Hudson Bay.
Right.
And so you could use it as oil and gas export facility, or for fertilizer. That's been talked about a lot. It's currently being used for exporting zinc from one of the zinc mines in northern Manitoba.
Really? I did not know.
Yeah, they shipped about 10,000 tons last year. Hope to do 20 bars
or on ocean-going tankers.
Yep.
Really?
Yep. Yeah. So
Wow.
that's happening, and obviously it's a major resupply point for northern Manitoba and just northern air, because they bring ships around from Montreal up around northern Quebec to Churchill.
Sure.
As well as there's talk of putting loading containers and stuff either at the port or putting them to the port there and then shipping.
Because if you're talking about interprovincial trade barriers, most people haven't been up in the Arctic, but they don't realize how remote these communities are.
Yeah.
Like, I've been to Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk, and they have to barge fuel up in the summertime.
Yep. You've got a short shipping
up the Mackenzie River, right? Because there are no roads. There is no highway.
Yeah.
Like, you either airlift this thing, like you're either going to have dirigible, heavy lift blimp.
Yeah, there's been those kinds of concepts as well. And there's a couple big gold mines that are being built up in the Northwest Territories and
Ring of Fires, kind of northern Ontario, right?
Yeah, Ring of Fires, northern Ontario, but these are up in was it the George mine deposit, Mount Hope Bay gold, way north. And so they've only got a short.
It's up there too, right?
Well, of course.
That's Saavedra. I can never say it. It's like on some island where they in the Northwest Passage where they can refuel the diesel ships.
Yeah, it's a big empty place. Not a lot. You can't just pop down to the store to get your parts for whatever gets broke. So you need to load up in that short shipping season. But in terms of Hudson Bay, obviously, yes, it's ocean, it's salty.
Right.
But of course, it's fed by a lot of the freshwater lakes, so it's not as salty as what, say, the Atlantic Ocean is. But a lot of that ice that's in there is only first-year ice, and so it's easy to actually traverse. It's not very hard, and it is. And the open ocean, like the lack of ice in the Hudson Bay, that season is expanding here as we are progressing through time.
One of the benefits of climate change.
Which
we have no editorial policy.
That's right.
Yeah. So what do you see happening in the future? Are you encouraged by some of these developments? Now the government in Manitoba has been talking. The new premier Canoe. Yeah. I can't say it, but I can kind of visualize it. Yeah. So they've donated some money for some studies, and they're going to build some hydro out there. I think hydro is a missing link.
Well, there's a few dams already on the Nelson River, like it's designated as an industrial river already. They are talking about expanding more of their electricity production and then clean electricity production in Manitoba.
Sure.
And you could run, like these big power lines, like say straight across to Fort McMurray. And like for some perspective, it sounds like a long ways, but it's it's like going from Calgary to northern Alberta. It's the same distance across, a little over 1,000 kilometers, and it's over pretty empty ground. So you could easily go and do that. You could easily, if you just put a little bit of a rail spur out to Port Nelson, you could really start shipping a lot of goods out there, like through offshore terminals type of thing.
We're talking more than just like oil and gas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Consumer goods.
Yeah, 100%.
What was it they were talking about? One of those inland ports in Winnipeg, right?
Yeah, that's almost like a tax structured type of development, and Winnipeg,
yeah, like a free trade zone.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they did in Europe.
Yeah. There's lots of them all around the world. We just should get on the boat here too.
Well, that's always the story about Amsterdam. So Amsterdam, Holland had a storm. There was a global warming, washed away half the country, shifted the rivers. So they put a dam on the Amstel. They called it a free trade zone. And then the next thing you know, they were world traders, right?
Yeah. So it would really, it would save a ton in shipping costs. It's done everywhere else in the world, like all across the north of Russia. We've seen dozens and dozens of oil tanker ships, not even ice rated tanker ships now going across northern Russia. Not recommending that, but they do. And you've got the Gulf of Bothnia, which is off Finland. That's often ice laden. People who live in Eastern Canada will know that the St. Lawrence is often,
Sure.
full of ice, and we still ship, product into Montreal and Quebec City. So
Yeah, I know, like through the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
seems to me
Yeah.
like how often is that thing frozen? I remember when we were in school, we used to see the pictures of the boats that would get stuck in the winter. Do they even get
Yeah.
stuck through the whole entire winter anymore?
Yeah, I can just say I know for a fact they do, because I just saw an article on that the other day. That there was a ship stuck in the St. Lawrence that needed some help because of some ice. But they deal with it now. As Canadians, we deal with it. There's a great Canadian shipping company. I mean, they go all up to the north and they ship through the ice. Like we do it in Canada already. It's just people aren't aware of it. So
Right.
yeah.
And then it's kind of timely with these Trump tariffs that we're looking for a way out, and we're going to increase interprovincial trade and reduce barriers and things. Then we're going to have to get it somewhere, right?
Yep.
And Winnipeg is a very central location.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. And we've got massive amounts of resources in this country to actually ship. Like we have no risk of running out. I mean, as much as people have probably become aware of the immensity of the oil sands and the amount of oil that's there, we have probably multiples of that in natural gas reserves and resources in Alberta,
Minerals,
on critical minerals, uranium,
potash.
Yep. Yeah. Copper mines. And that goes
diamonds.
Yeah, diamonds in the north. Yeah. And that actually kind of goes back to what, Carney says these words about, getting these resources to market. But if you're going to keep, Bill C-69, we're going to continue to see things like mines take, 5, 10, 12 years for approval. And so despite, it's good, it's welcomed that Carney has said that, we're going to get the approval timelines down from 5 years to 2 years through a single regulatory window. Yeah, that's what we used to have.
Right.
Vote conservative, though, because they'll do it in one. So
sure. Or even, we were talking before the show that it's going to take him probably at this rate 5 years to be able to come up with an agreement to actually lay the foundation for this 2-year window. So, and how long is the Liberal term going to last? I mean,
and if you give provinces or other interest groups an effective veto on it, you're never going to end up seeing it.
And why wouldn't you? If you're a rural native band up, on your reserve, you got maybe 10,000 people. Well, there's only 40,000 people all in the entire Northwest Territories. Yeah. And they handed you a video or a veto. Wouldn't you take it?
Well, I mean, just in the sense of Calgary
just
here.
To make demands, right?
Yeah. We've got the Tsutsina Reserve, right? When the province wanted to put through the ring road,
right?
They, credit to them. They leveraged their negotiations to the max and then got $1 billion out of the province in the city.
They had to change the name of the one stretch there that went past the casino. It's not it's not the Tsutsina. It's over by where the Costco is, and and they had to get a deal to break the curb, to break the smash curb, so that they could put the road in through there, right? Yeah.
So if you don't have that will from the federal government itself, and you're giving vetoes and out, it's not gonna happen. I mean, business and capital is fluid, so it will flow to other places where it can make things, get projects actually developed, and that's just not Canada right now. And unfortunately, we've burned a lot of these foreign investors as governments, and so they're very cautious on deploying capital here. So by contrast, you look at well, my wife is Ugandan, so go over there, and you can see how you've got a country of 50 million people, third world country, wants to, improve its economic plight.
Sure.
They've got a lot of oil resources in the west side of the country. The president is strongly pushing through, a pipeline for export through Tanzania to get to the coast. You're seeing massive investment in oil and gas development because they know and they see the positive impact that oil and the revenues and the royalties will have on jobs, infrastructure development, so social services, funding healthcare, education, all that. We seem to have they've got that figured out in Africa. Like, maybe we should start taking a lesson from the Africans. I don't know.
Right. So, are you still involved in this? Like, where do you see?
No,
and what?
I'm not. I'm not anymore. So
So
after
it's kind of pie. It's gone back into the pie in the sky.
Well, in terms of Hudson Bay, was involved for a while, and then there's a group that really picked up the torch from. Well, to be very blunt about it, we had an agreement, and we were literally told by the representative from the Prime Minister's office, "There's no way we're going to let you buy this." That's the quote. You can fill in the blank,
Right.
and so that kind of put a pause on that. But another group called Nistanan has really picked up the torch. It's an indigenous-led uh, uh, entity that's moving the whole utility corridor forward. And yeah, it's fertilizer, grains, which is very applicable to there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've spoken with Robin before.
Yeah.
He's a mutual friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a very interesting concept, and they've persevered.
I give them a lot of credit, because negotiating with 3 different provincial governments and all the various native bands, that they've been able to cobble everyone together, and then there's election changes and changes in government and changes in band leadership, and so they've done a good job. They're moving it forward. It is good now that we've seen Trump's tariff threats. It seems to be catalyzing and coalescing some opinion around making this a priority. And so I hope that the various governments get behind them and make it happen.
Lit a candle.
Yeah.
You have to give Trump credit for that. I mean,
well,
he has managed to do something no leader in this country has done for the last 150 years, which is unify it, right?
Well, you unify it, and hopefully it results in some action and not just words. And that's the problem I see with Carney's pronouncements on energy. They're words, but they lack the actual substance to make things happen. So again, I chalk it up to nothing more than like Trudeau's comments about the budget will balance itself. They're as worthy as those words. So what we've seen out of the Conservative government or proposals in their campaign platform is much more encouraging to actually seeing Canada unleash its wealth and potential, which is really important when you start looking at the economic performance of Canada over this past decade under the Liberals. We've really fallen behind the Americans and other countries as well. So we've got to get our act together. And in your comment in terms of Trump, it's hopefully given us a bit of a kick in the butt to actually
get out there and do something.
Yeah.
Sounds
not
great.
getting our own way.
Well, thanks a lot, Jeff. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, pleasure.
Yeah, as always.
Yeah, likewise. So if you want to talk about orphan well stuff too, that's
maybe let's save that for another show. Yeah, that's
another
show. A work in progress as well.
It is,
and it's another one of those complicated issues.
Extremely complex issues. There are some solutions, but there's no overnight quick fixes to the issue. So,
and there never are. Yeah. So there we go. There's Jeff, and talking about utility quarters and a little bit about orphan wells. Thank you very much. Okay, here we are with Russ Barnett, who heads up, nobody really knows what it's called. They're going by the formal handle of the Rural Alberta Concerned Communities Group, acronym RACCG. It's kind of an informal coalition of landowners and concerned citizens near Caroline who are opposed to a solar farm that's almost twice as big as the town itself. And since putting together this coalition, it's against an Alberta Utilities Commission ruling, which by coincidence came down on Friday, the February 28th at 5 o'clock, which we in the news business call the witching hour, because that's usually when the bad news comes and the powers that be don't think that there's going to be a chance for anybody to really respond to it. Well, Caroline did, and I happened to travel out for a meeting in the arena where skating legend and Canadian icon Kurt Browning spent his formative early days training. And I can tell you firsthand that these are motivated people, they're reasonable people, and they're exposing a shortcoming in the legislation when it comes to renewable energy in general, and for all the right reasons. Surprise, surprise, when we started covering the story here in the Western Standard, it exploded. And as it turns out, there are at least a dozen other municipalities across Alberta that are in the same situation with respect to unwanted renewable developments in their communities. And they're mostly on private land. it was like all these voices thought they were crying alone in the dark, and it's starting to turn into a real movement. So one of the other interesting things was is after we started running the stories, and I'm not sure that Russ knows this, we got a letter from people in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, which is experiencing some of these similar issues, and they wanted us to cover their story as well. So here we are with Russ, and we're going to check in and see what they're doing and what some of their next steps are. And it seems like there's been developments every day. Russ, how's it going?
No, it's going pretty well. Thanks for the opportunity, Shaun.
Well, thank you. So you sent me a quick little email here today about how the AUC is starting to pull down the videos of the public meetings that are going on their website. Do you think that that's kind of a response to maybe some of the negative coverage that they've been getting from this?
I'm not sure if this is a new thing or whether this has been standard practice since the beginning. I know that I certainly watched all the 5 days of proceedings that we had, and I looked at other ones as well. And there's been a couple of other articles done by other media that's been put up on YouTube, and that's been removed by the AUC as well.
Really?
And so this whole, like how this started was a couple of 2.5 years ago. I live in Caroline, and we were notified that there was going to be developer was moving into Caroline and would like to put a solar farm here in Caroline, and within the village limits, and about twice the size of the community. And so there wasn't that much resistance because the possibility of this being approved based on common sense and the people's thoughts were like, this has no chance because it's going to be built across the street within village limits. Across from a kid's park, the outdoor rink, etc., like literally across the street. And so it started, and then the UCP government, they were elected in May 2023, by representing the people of Alberta. And then in, I guess it was August of that same year, August 2023, they brought Daniel Smith and the UCP government brought in a pause on renewables while they assessed what was happening. And so that pause ran for a year, and we thought that, okay, it's been paused and common sense is going to come back, and these things will, be evaluated on the merits and, with municipal input, etc. And following, well, there was 4 main things that the UCP government brought in for the renewables, and they wanted the AUC to focus on agricultural land. And that's a big one. And then they wanted to protect viewscapes for, the wind farms and the solar projects, etc.
Yep.
The other one was to pay attention to municipal input, and then to make sure that there was reclamation costs, even if it's on private land, such that when the solar farm or solar project had run its life, then there would be, reclamation dollars and everything would be taken care of and it would be removed. Mm-hmm. And so we never really got that involved because it was on pause and these things were coming, and there's absolutely no way that anybody would look at the proposed project in Caroline and say, okay, so that's okay. It protects the viewscapes, it's only across the street, it's on agricultural land, but that's no big deal. We've got a new term called agrivoltaics. It's a marketing term like solar farm. Like, it's not a farm, it's a project. And agrivoltaics is it's a dreamt up term.
Right. And
so it just kept moving along, and we got involved. And when you look at the AUC, they're a quasi judiciary, and they're supposed to be under the control of Mr. Newdorf and ultimately Daniel Smith.
Yep. And
you can't fight the AUC because they control the process. There's no such thing as an appeal because you're going back and you're asking them. You have to prove that they've made errors on their irregular decision. It's the same group. You're going back. It's a request for variance. They don't even call it an appeal.
Right.
And so right from the beginning, we realized that the group and other folks, like you said before, around rural Alberta, we recognize that you can't fight the AUC. They control the process. It's the same group. They have a huge propensity to approve every sort of project, and they'll go through contortions to justify those approvals, so much so that they look foolish.
Right.
Well, perhaps that's the reason that these videos and these hearings on YouTube are being removed, because if you went back and watched them, their justifications make them look ridiculous.
You'd be shaking your head. Yeah, I've sat through some of these hearings in the past, and Yeah, I know kind of what they're all about. So
Yeah.
you must have been encouraged though by the letter from MLA Nixon, Jason Nixon. I've met him a couple times. He's a pretty amicable fellow, but he seems to be kind of on your side in all this as well. Would you agree with that?
For sure. Let's face his constituency offices in Rocky Mountain House.
Yep.
And so because of the amalgamation, Clearwater got engaged, rather late, I would say, but
Yep.
they had the opportunity to go over and sit down personally with Nixon and explain everything that was happening.
Yep.
And that caused him to write the letter to Mr. Newdorf.
Yes.
And I followed that letter.
Who's been a little less committal, I understand.
That's right.
And I've met him as well, and he's an amicable fellow, but
Yeah.
he's almost kind of a junior minister in the whole thing, because he's said before that like his portfolio isn't really that big. And when we're talking about this power portfolio and in terms of like exports from Alberta, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not a millions of dollars
No.
kinds of things. So it
No.
almost seems like you guys were probably a little bit off the radar.
Yeah, when you think about that from the power generation capability and what it does to actually rule Alberta and Alberta in general.
Yep.
If the solar farm here, solar project, was up and running and it ran for a complete year based on all the previous statistics and sunlight area in this area, etc.,
Yep.
it would add to the Alberta utility grid 0.013%.
So why are they going through all this hassle?
It's an insignificant amount.
For 0.01%. Why would they raw so many feathers? Oh, and I understand that Caroline's only 500 people, but it seems to have really kind of caught fire across the rest of Alberta.
Well, if you could build something, and let's say it cost you $100, and you got $50 from the government to build it, and then you could turn around and sell it for $75 after 12 months of operation, why wouldn't you do that?
Sure. Why wouldn't you? Exactly.
So it's the tax
Premier
money.
Smith, all these emissions credits, and they're using the credits to finance these things. I got a real lesson in renewable economics just talking with you over the last couple weeks here. That you can, Stephen Jabot was running around touting Alberta's renewable grid market, while Alberta's got the only deregulated power market in the country. And if you can go and get 30% tax credits from the federal government, you can use emissions credits, and then you can bankroll this thing, and you're from Germany or wherever they're from, and then build it and then turn around and sell it without having to put up a dime of the reclamation, like you talked about. We've got this big issue in Alberta here with the abandoned orphan wells, and some people are saying that's going to cost $100 billion, and don't quote me on that, because I'm going to have Alberta Energy regulator calling me up and saying that no taxpayers aren't paying for that, but really we are, right?
It's
So,
the propensity. It's the whole AUC process is corrupt, and there's some blatant things that highlight that. For example, the developer is tasked to report to the AUC the municipal, I guess, opinion of the project. So
Right.
of course, the developer, you go out and tell us, and of course, they're motivated to get it done. So is the AUC. So in the example of Caroline, we've got about 500 people, 302 voters, eligible voters, UCP type, or,
and most of them were in the arena there that day. Like pretty much, I was still sitting there thinking that, wow, that must be pretty much the entire voting population of the town.
That's right. And so, I'm an accountant on the backside, so I like numbers. And so I went in and looked at all the information that was put forth by Pace, which is the company, which is owned 50% out of the UK and 50% out of Germany. So it has nothing to do with Canadian operations, other than the local people hired.
Or the community, right?
Or the community. So I went and looked at the information that Pace put forward, and they put forth to the AUC that the population of the village of Caroline supports it. And so then they had nice pie graphs and bar graphs and things. So I went in and took a look, because I know I'm within, it's literally, if I look out my window here, I would be able to see it. And so we looked at, and the sample size that was provided to the AUC was 12.
Oh my
and
gosh.
The amount of people that supported it were 7. And so that got a favorable review.
Unbelievable.
And so the AUC says, well, the village didn't object. The people didn't object. the village council, I mean, they were basically, missing in action the whole process.
Well,
And
and you're
so
being amalgamated into Clearwater County, right? There's a devolution
that,
there of the town into a hamlet.
that's correct. So anything that isn't explicitly stated is viewed as a positive by the AUC.
Right.
So, it's a corrupt process, and that's one. And then they have the same company that's going to provide the reclamation costs or the bonding or what's supposed to happen. That's the same company that provides the estimate as to what is supposed to be removed. So there's multiple things throughout the process that really make no logical sense.
Well,
So
and one of the things that you were talking about too was this mitigation. They're going to use the sheep to eat the grass underneath the solar panels, but you're on the eastern slopes of the Rockies, and there's wolves and coyotes and bears and
well, all these mitigation efforts, right, are basically, none of them have been proven. In the agrivoltaics one, what's the fallback? When the Saskatoon berries never work, right, or the lettuces don't work,
and the bears come in and eat them. Yeah,
right. And then, so like you said, with all, here's a plan to put sheep in. Well, who's going to do the sheep? Who's managing the sheep? Well, we don't really know. Do they have any experience? No.
It's almost like Bugs Bunny and the coyote, right? The coyote and the dog.
So the developer is able to say this is a process that works, and there's no empirical evidence required from the developer side.
Right.
When the community,
because it's never been done, really. I mean, like, we're talking about an industry that's
but they don't even ask for evidence.
Right.
And so when we say it's going to reduce property values and it's going to do this, and we hire independent experts, H3, environmentalists and all these other people,
right,
and then they produce information in the AUC hearing. Well,
right.
You need all this evidence, but AUC can just say, well, you didn't have anything specified. There was no land use bylaws in the land was zoned for future residential.
Right.
And because there was nothing in our land use bylaws with regards to solar farms, because they didn't solar projects, because they didn't exist, 20 years ago.
Right.
That was
and for
by
people
the
who don't
AUC's
know,
approval. That's right.
The land use bylaw is basically the essential foundation of the municipality, right? Some of these land use bylaws go back. When was the town of Caroline even founded? Like in the 1940s?
Yeah, it must have been a long time ago.
Or the 50s, right? So they just keep on amending these bylaws as time goes by, right? And it's like you said, these solar developments haven't even really been around. So what's the position of the county?
Yeah, so the big problem that the county has, and all the other municipalities and things, Milo and Hanna and Lamond and all these other ones that I'm talking to, Sturgeon Lake and Smoky River and things, is that these municipalities in the Municipal Government Act, there's a clause 619 that basically allows the AUC and other regulators to ignore any land use bylaws or anything that the municipality comes up with. They can override if they feel it's warranted.
Wow.
And so a lot of the communities won't go forward because they said, well, what's the point? Because the AUC is just going to override us.
Right.
So it took some conversations with the Clearwater Council, because they face the same thing. Well, why do this? Because the AUC can just override us. In my opinion,
where do they stand now? Where does Clearwater stand on it?
They're fighting it.
They are.
They are participating in the proceeding. They've highlighted palpable errors. They've hired lawyers. They filed again this morning up onto the AUC proceeding, so that the county is now, involved. They had to be pretty much. They were over there talking face to face with Mr. Nixon,
right?
And that's so.
Well, and you guys have only amalgamated with the county since I think it was effective January 1st, right?
That's correct.
And Mr. Nixon did note that in his letter to
for sure.
To the AUC. Yeah. So we were also talking about Premier Smith was on her talk radio show. As we all know, that Premier Smith used to be a talk radio show host when she was kind of in the political wilderness.
For sure. Yep.
Were you encouraged by some of her comments? She made some kind of encouraging comments that maybe perhaps this is a little ideologically motivated from the previous NDP government, but at the same time, it seemed like she's kind of stopped short of maybe implementing another moratorium 2.0 or making some actual legislative changes.
Yeah. So we were encouraged, and Mark was one of the folks that I've been speaking with and things, and he called into the show, And she acknowledges that this is leftover from, from the Notley era. This is ideological driven. There really is no sort of common sense behind it. She talked about the need for baseload power, in order to have a reliable utility grid, etc.
Well, she's talked about that a lot since she became premier. Yeah. And she is very knowledgeable about some of these issues, I would say.
Yeah. And then she brings up the private ownership thing and the protection of private ownership and what they can do with the land, with your own land.
Yeah.
But of course, that's a ridiculous point, in my opinion, because
to a point. I mean, there's a thing in Chestermere. Do you know the story on the water slide park there? Guy built it on private land, and it's like one of the world's largest water slides, and it's completely abandoned, and it's on
totally
on the interweb of one of the top 10 creepiest places on earth. After, like you said, after it's been abandoned, and how do you pull up all that cement and everything that went into it, right?
So I don't feel that you can't just take, when you buy a piece of property, it comes with rules and regulations and zoning and mineral rights and all the other sort of stuff. So to protect that, I understand.
My house in Calgary, I can't start painting up murals on it, on the front of my house.
Well, no, and I can't bring drilling rigs into my backyard here and start drilling for geothermal.
Yep.
They'll probably frown on that.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think that's a weak excuse, but her acknowledgement of the rest of it, I think, is encouraging.
Okay.
And I think that's what, as the members all around Alberta, I guess become more and more cohesive, then the voice will get stronger and stronger. But there's definitely that. I receive calls all day long. People are sending in my flyers. And that's another one too. I think when you were up in Caroline, you saw the flyers that were created, Stop this insanity. Let's tell the AUC.
Yep.
So, print your name and address and everything and phone number and email and all that sort of stuff. Well, those were all excluded. I filed all those up on the proceeding with the AUC.
Yep.
And the AUC fought back with the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, saying that these people explicitly didn't say that their names and everything could be made public.
Right.
And so my comment back to the AUC, because it says right on the flyer, let's tell the AUC, if they have a different interpretation as to why people signed this, I'd be very interested to hear it.
Sure.
So, but anyway, so they just killed all those people that signed the flyers and, to show their support. The AUC denied all of that.
Yeah, that happened here in Calgary with the recall. They
invalidated. That's right.
60,000 signatures on a petition. So what are the next steps here, Russ? What have you guys got up your sleeves?
One of the next steps that came off, and keep in mind, I don't speak for all these people, but just sort of passing on what's happening. But I think the next step is each person is solidifying their support in their different areas. And so we're going to get together sort of as a more formal group. And I think we'll multi-author a letter to the political people as well, expressing concerns. And the other one is to take some of the decisions that have been previously made and compare those decisions and come up with some sort of commonality as to how the AUC is going through contortions to justify things that just don't make sense. There will be a common track in that. And so I think that's one of the things that we need to do, so we can sit down with Newdorf and the other politicians and say, look, this is it's not just Caroline. Caroline was the one that sparked this because it's probably the most ridiculous one that's been proposed and been conditionally approved, right? The conditions are just crazy, right?
Right. And it's like you said, I mean, they promised to do this that was the whole point of the moratorium pause. It was because people really didn't want this, and it was to be able to give them a voice and the say in how it was supposed to go, right?
Yeah. But the AUC, by their actions, they've basically told the public that they don't really care.
Right. Or they're operating under some different standard. Yeah. Okay,
another
Russ,
example,
we're going to have to cut it there.
Okay, Shaun, I was just going to say
about that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so if you win one of these AUC, if you win in the hearing, then the AUC will coach the developer, encourage them to reapply.
Right.
So that's sort of sparking absolute outrage. So that's what the group is going to carry on.
That was in another one of your letters, was kind of like the open door rejection policy or something like that.
This is the Eastervale project.
Yeah. Oh,
700 acres of glass on agricultural land.
Right. And yours isn't even 700 acres.
No, but it's twice the size of the village.
Right. Like you said, it's almost the absurdity of it all that's driving.
Oh, for sure. No, it's not,
Okay,
Shaun.
well,
Thanks very much for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. And chances are we're going to have you back on real quick so that Western Standard readers can stay tuned with what's happening in Caroline. And in that regard, now's the time for me to make the pitch to become a Western Standard member. If you're not already, just go up to westernstandard.news, sign up. People like Russ will be able to tell you. One of the things when I went to Caroline, I was really impressed with was how many people actually read the Western Standard and how many people are using us as their main source of news to cover some of these exact issues like that they're dealing with, with the solar farms and the rural developers. And so just want to make a pitch to all you folks out there to sign up. It's extremely reasonable. We're only talking about $10 a month, which was, I used to work at the Herald, and I think, one of the criticisms was it was about $2 a day. And, so the question was like, would you pay $2 a day to get basically wire copy and, news that you can pretty much get anywhere else? So there we go.